Jonathan Wilson, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Eamon Dunphy is writing in the Star today that he was basically crying watching England and the impact that Rice and Grealish had, and what might have been for the Republic of Ireland. So we're kind of doing a bit of living vicariously through the English football team at the moment in this piece. It turns out Jack Grealish is he's good at international football anyway.
He's good at coming off a bench in certain games in international football. I think that's probably a fair way of putting it. I still think, and it's sort of a sort of diluted version of the issues he's had at City, that Southgate demands those wide forwards fulfil their defensive responsibilities. There's quite clear roles for them in blocking the opposition fullbacks, and I think still a doubt remains for him on how good Grealish is at doing that. And I think that interview Grealish gave on the pitch after the final day of the season when City had won the title, which was one of the more extraordinary interviews I've seen, where he basically admitted that and said, he's really trying, but he finds it difficult. And now he's finding he's second guessing himself. And so the thing that made him great at Villa and that made him so effective against Germany on Tuesday night was that he's worried about taking a player on because he's worried about losing the ball, and he knows that will annoy Guardiola and to a lesser extent Southgate. So I think, given the depth of talent England have in those positions, and that probably, to be honest, doesn't include Jared Bowen, who also made an impact off a bench on Tuesday, I would suggest his role for England is probably as an impact sub when England need to break the pattern of the game, and his dribbling ability clearly is a great asset in doing that.
So he's a plan B in case of emergency break glass.
Well, I think it's, because that suggests you'd only a plan B suggests he's not part of, well, by definition he's not part of plan A. I think he's a subsidiary part of plan A.
Okay.
He's the part of plan A you come to after sort of 65 minutes when opposing defences are tired, when the shape of the game has formed, and if you want to break that shape, if it's useful to you to break that shape, he's a great asset to have. And I don't think that is, I think we have a sort of hangover from the days even before substitutes or before two substitutes, when a specialised substitute role was seen as sort of almost demeaning to a player. But actually, I think now we need to be a bit smarter than that. We need to say a game is 90 minutes or perhaps 120 minutes long, and you're allowed 5 substitutes, and that means you've got 16 players you can deploy at various times. And it may be that the best value of this particular player is not to start the game, but is after an hour or in a certain circumstance, and that specialised role, I don't think there should be any shame in that. I mean, a sort of slightly more sort of pedestrian example of that was when West Brom had Shane Long and Lukaku, and often Long would start with run the legs off a defence, Lukaku would come on, and Lukaku would score because the defence was knackered, or the other way around. I get that players still want to start games, want to play as many minutes as possible, but I think when you have a squad with the depth of an England squad or a modern elite squad, I don't think there should be any shame in those specialised roles.
The 5 substitutes is really the game changer in that aspect, though, because there's been instances before where a player like Grealish is on the bench, somebody gets sent off or injured early, and suddenly one of the subs options is gone, and then all of a sudden it's like, and then he doesn't get off the bench. You're like, hang on a second, that could have changed the game for you. But now with 5 subs, you're always going to have room to make that substitute, and you can promise somebody in advance, look, you're going to have 35 minutes here, make sure you're paying attention to what's going on, keep an eye out for anything, and you'll be ready to go after the hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course there's the flip side of that, which is the impact on the player who starts, because particularly those wide areas where you have to track the opposing fullbacks, and you can say to those wide players, just chase them, just run. If you're knackered after 55 minutes, that doesn't matter, because we got Jack Grealish can come on, or Bukayo Saka can come on, or whoever. Look at the bench. We've got lots of players who play in your position. So run yourself out. Destroy that fullback as much as you can in the first hour. And when you're knackered, you can come off. And they're unlikely to want to use one of those substitutes to replace a fullback. And therefore, we've got a tired fullback against one of our lads who's fresh. And I think given England have that, we've sort of almost become the way the narrative's gone in England recently has been, it's always, it's such a shame we've got this depth in wide areas that, why couldn't we have another centre-back, or why couldn't we have a slightly more reliable keeper, or why couldn't we have a backup to Harry Kane? And all of that is true, but it is a strength. So I think using it and saying, right, one of these players is going to play for an hour, and he's going to run himself silly, and he's going to destroy the fullback by doing that. And then we bring on somebody else. That is a strength, and we should embrace that and use the strength we have.
Jonathan, we know the attacking talent that you've mentioned that this England team and Gareth Southgate are blessed with, but like that formation that we saw working to such great effect in the Euros, that 3-5-2 that led them all the way to the final, seems to now be, from watching them the other night, be in favour of this more attacking 4-2-3-1. Obviously, Southgate has the problem of trying to cram in as many of these attacking players as he possibly can. But do you think that could be to the detriment of the team ultimately, that they're almost leaving behind the system that led them to such great success in the Euros?
Yeah, I mean, I think the formation in Germany was pretty experimental, and I'd be surprised if he tries against Italy, but I'd be surprised if that's a long-term plan. I think what we've seen over the past sort of year, 18 months, and certainly at the Euros, is if Southgate thinks England will dominate possession, he'll play a 4-3-3, and that allows him to get in one more attacking player. If he thinks there's going to be a contest for possession or that England aren't going to be able to dominate it, he plays the back three, whether that's a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3. He seems to like, even when it's a 3-4-3, it tends to be Sterling playing almost off Kane. Sterling hasn't played the last two games, so the Hungary game and the Germany game have been slightly different anyway. So I was simultaneously surprised that he played with the back three against Hungary, because that's a game where I think you would expect to dominate possession, and I think that was possibly conditioned by how poor the performance was against Hungary at Wembley in the Nations League last year. Was it a Nations League? Was that a qualifier? No, it was a qualifier. Sorry, in the qualifier last year. And then I was surprised he went with the back four against Germany. I thought it would always be a back three against a team of Germany's quality. And I think one of the reasons England got passed around as much as they were in that first sort of hour or so was that they didn't have the extra man at the back. And I think to an extent that was Southgate proving to himself and maybe some of his critics that we're not good enough to play a back four against a team of Germany's quality. And the fact that he was then able to change the game and in a positive way, so that England could have nicked it at the end. I mean, it would have been a smash and grab, but they could have nicked it at the end. I think the biggest criticism you could have of Southgate has been his in-game management. The Croatia semi-final, when the Croatian wing-backs pushed forward and England started to be overmanned in midfield, and Jordan Henderson was sort of running shuttles across the pitch, chasing the ball hopelessly. And then the final of the Euros against Italy, when beginning that second half, you could feel momentum shift, and Southgate didn't really react to that until the crucial goal had been conceded. Well, here was an instance of him in a game changing things and it working, and England getting back into it.
Most countries kind of look on fairly jealously, Jonathan, particularly at the English, how stacked it is at right back. And you see the other night, I mean, you think of the likes of Rhys James and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who you would expect would get into most international teams across the world. And then you see another right back in Kieran Trippier being adopted at left back. Like, are you surprised to see someone like Kyle Walker still operating at right back? He's probably more used to being that right-sided centre half himself of late. But with all the depth of talent they have in that position, is there any surprise among English fans, media, that Kyle Walker is still the man being preferred there?
I don't think so. I mean, the great thing that Walker gives you, all four are excellent right backs. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter which of the four it is. Trippier is used on the left because with Chilwell being injured or just coming back from injury, there isn't an equivalent figure on the left. So in that sense, Trippier takes care of himself. Walker's pace is such an asset, and if you think back to the Germany game at the Euros, there's a couple of occasions when Walker's pace got England out of jail, and that allows them to be slightly more aggressive. And they're still not that aggressive, but slightly more aggressive in the press and playing a slightly higher line, because Walker's pace and Pickford's aptitude in leaving his line mean that they can afford to leave a little bit more space there. So, yeah, he's playing for Manchester City. He's playing for the league champions. He's a very, very good right back. But it's his pace that maybe just sets him above the others in Southgate's mind. I think there's clearly the fourth choice now is Alexander-Arnold. And performance against Hungary was pretty poor. And I think that's not really an issue with him so much as that the way he plays for Liverpool, you need a very high press because he will leave space behind him. And that's not a criticism. He should leave space behind because he's so good going forward. He's so good at linking with Mohamed Salah. What was it, 12 assists in the Premier League last season? His crossing is exceptional. So you want him to be using those parts of his game. But for him to do that, there will be space behind him. Now, you'd think in a wing-back system that should work, because you now have a right-side centre-back, possibly Kyle Walker, covering behind him. And that's something I'd quite like to see England try, although not a huge amount of time now before the World Cup to try that. But if it's a back four, England just don't press as hard. They don't press as high. And what that means is that opposing midfielders have time to measure a pass into that space. So the great example of this is when Liverpool lost to Real Madrid in the Champions League last season, when they lost 3-1 in Madrid. And the first 2 goals both came from Toni Kroos not being pressed, because Liverpool's press last season was all over the place at that stage, not being pressed, being able to measure those passes in behind Alexander-Arnold, and he then couldn't get back. And so Alexander-Arnold, his way of playing at Liverpool works because of the rest of the Liverpool system. The way England play is very different to that. And in international football, you don't have the time to generate that sophistication of press that you have at Liverpool. So England can't really play like that. So England, almost by definition, as an international team, they can't get the best out of Alexander-Arnold. Although, as I say, possibly there would be an opportunity at right wing back, but that's not the system he's used to playing, and that would take adaptation. That would take time.
They've really got to try that, though, right? Because he's so spectacularly good. I mean, there's a world in which he might not even make the squad, is there, for the World Cup?
I think there's definitely a world which doesn't make the squad. I mean, do they have to try it? I think Rhys James defensively is better, and that's not to do with positioning. That's to do with just in one-on-one duels. I think Rhys James is a better player. He's not quite as good on the ball, but he's not. He's a good crosser. I think you saw with Chelsea last season when he was injured, a lot of that supply down the right disappeared. So, I mean, you can argue which is the better all-round player, Alexander-Arnold or Rhys James, but I think you can certainly make the case that Rhys James is the better all-round defensive player who can also get forward. So, I mean, you can play Rhys James on the right side of 3 centre-backs as well. There's that option, which again speaks of England's strength. But I'd like to see it tried, I guess, is what I'm saying. But I don't. I'm also uneasy about this idea that just because a player plays really well at club level, that means he has to be in the national squad. Now, for a long time for England, that was the case because England just didn't have enough players. But England are in this very, very happy position at the minute where they probably have 40 or 50 players who would be totally reasonable members of a World Cup squad. And when that's the case, I think we got to get beyond this idea of handing out international caps like there were sort of Blue Peter badges or something, a reward for playing well. It's not. It's so you've got the team, you've got the squad, and then you've got to think of it like a club manager. If I go out and bring in this player who I don't have to pay any money for, which is obviously the difference, but is he going to make the squad better? What is he going to do in that squad that's going to improve the overall performance of the team and the overall balance of the squad? And if a player's not going to do that, if he's going to complicate things tactically, if he's going to mean you have to deviate from the way you've been playing, and a way of being playing that has taken England to 2 semi-finals back-to-back, having been in 2 in the previous 50 years. So, you can't say it's not working. Then, I think maybe you do leave out some exceptional players who are playing well in the Premier League, and Alexander-Arnold may be one of them. There's also the argument he could possibly play in midfield in extremis. So he's worth having in the squad as a sort of utility player. And the fact that Trippier can play on either side, James Justin can play on either side, although he didn't play brilliantly against Hungary. And so there are options there that you can sort of burgle 2 places through one player.
All right.
Jonathan, just a final one for me, and this is something that kind of came up to in my head because of Harry Kane reaching this milestone 50th goal for England the other night. I think he's only a few off Wayne Rooney's record now. We had one of our colleagues on Off the Ball, Nathan Murphy, describing during the week Gareth Bale as the greatest British footballer since Bobby Charlton, which got a mixed reception. A lot of people agreeing, a lot of people disagreeing and giving their own picks. Throwing you under the bus here and kind of bringing this one to you without prior warning. But if you had to pick a greatest British footballer of all time, or even since Bobby Charlton, would you go along the Gareth Bale lines or have another pick?
I think Kenny Dalglish should be pretty upset by that. If you want to say, is he the greatest since Dalglish? There's an argument for it. I mean, it's an impossible question, isn't it? What are you judging on? If you're judging it on international performances, then Kane has been exceptional for England. I mean, 50 goals at a far faster rate than Rooney or indeed Gary Lineker or Charlton. He's incredible. He's been a Golden Boot at the World Cup. He's been brilliant for England. He's been brilliant for Spurs, but it's Spurs. Yeah, he hasn't been winning Champions Leagues in the way that Gareth Bale has. I don't know. I mean, the way Bale sort of has become a bit part player at Madrid, does that count against him? I don't know. I mean, these questions are very, very difficult to answer because it entirely depends what your terms are. I mean, if I can completely deflect and say, who's the greatest Argentinian player of all time? Is it the bloke who won the World Cup, but only won 3 league titles in his entire career? Or is it the bloke who hasn't won a World Cup, but has won 13 league titles and 5 Champions Leagues? Argentinians would still say it's Maradona. So, it entirely depends what your parameters are. Kane's been great. Bale's been great. Kenny Dalglish, I think, would probably like to be in that conversation as the greatest since Dalglish rather than the greatest since Charlton.
You would have Kenny up there with the two lads, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, okay.
I mean,
I only saw the very end of Kenny Dalglish, like the last couple of seasons, so I'm kind of unfamiliar with just how great he was.
I mean, won 3 European Cups with them, 6 league titles, 6 league titles, I think, as a player, maybe 5. His link up with Rush was, but I mean, Rush has got an argument there as well. I mean, Rush was I think we don't realise now how good Rush was, because part of the thing he did was his pressing, but in those days we didn't really talk about pressing. The way we consumed football in the early 80s was by highlights, and highlights obviously don't show you the forward chasing the fullback. So that front pairing, I think is arguably the greatest front pairing in English league history. So
right,
that's
an even better conversation that you started for us this morning, Jonathan.
Yeah, sorry, I drifted off, but I mean, I kind of, the thing I always think about these conversations about who's the best, who's the greatest, is not actually what answer you come to. It's what is your method? What are you actually analysing there? And it's clearly not just about goals or trophies won or
emotion. It's all about emotion and love, isn't it? That's ultimately what did you enjoy more, Maradona in 86 or Messi's career? And then for a lot of people who saw Maradona, it's going to be Maradona forever because that's the thing that made them fall in love with football.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of that, and it's also about narrative, and it's about sort of which one most conform. Yeah, I think one of the things that almost counts against Messi is it seems so easy for him, and I'm sure it's not. But Maradona, you could see the struggle, and I think we like to think about geniuses as being these tortured figures who have to sort of personally suffer for their talent. Whereas Messi just seems to drift along, being brilliant every week. I mean, maybe less so at PSG, but in his Barcelona days, he seems entirely unruffled. Yeah, which almost suggests, in football terms, he's a greater genius because he doesn't have that offset. But in terms of an idea of what makes a story, what's a story you want to tell, Maradona fits that far more because of the enormous cost that his genius brought on him.
For sure, and also the fact that the defenders could break his ankle at any time, and did on a couple of occasions. Jonathan, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
Cheers, thank you.